The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics recently said that 4.3 million people quit their jobs in August of 2021. This is being called the Great Resignation. Instead of going back to an office, doing a job you don't love, millions of you are telling your bosses, no thank you, I'm never coming back again. So if you also want to take control of your work life, I have 3 tips in the rest of this video to help you do that. If we haven't met yet, my name is Chad Carson. You can also call me Coach, and this channel is all about getting out of the financial grind so that you can do more of what matters. The first tip I have for you is to get something called FU money and to get it as quickly as possible. Now, what does FU money mean? I'll let you use your imagination on the F part, but it basically means just having enough money in the bank to give you another F word, which is freedom. I first heard about the term FU money from J.L. Collins. And in one of his articles, he talked about FU money and he told a story about when he was in his 20s. He was working a job, he'd been working hard, but he always wanted to go to Europe and travel around, and he wanted to take a 1-month trip. So he went into his boss's office and he was going to negotiate. He was going to ask for this time off. And then when he came back, of course, he would get right back to work. And the boss wasn't happy about that. He basically said, no, you can't do that. You don't have my permission to do it. And so you know what J.L. Collins said? He said, okay, then I quit. I'm done. Now, how could a 20-something-year-old guy do that? He had money in the bank. Now, he wasn't rich. He didn't have financial independence at that point. But let's just say he had $10,000 or $15,000 in the bank. He had enough money to last him for a little while. Because of that, he could say, essentially, F you. I'm going to quit. I'm going to go to Europe anyway. And the end of that story that happened, though, was that the boss said, whoa, wait a minute. He didn't want to have to hire somebody new. He was a valuable person because J.L. Collins had leverage. So he was able to get his job back. Now, I'm not saying that's always going to happen, but it is a common occurrence when you have leverage. My wife and I found the same thing. In 2009, we weren't yet financially independent. We were doing pretty well, but we definitely had money in the bank. We had FU money. And my wife went in to negotiate for a 4-month trip. We were going to take a trip to South America. This was in the middle of the Great Recession, but we wanted to backpack around and travel. I wanted to learn Spanish. We just wanted to take a break. And so she did something very similar. She went in and talked to her boss, and she was so nervous about asking for this. And she just asked, could I take the fall semester off, and then come back for the next spring? Well, her boss was nervous that she was going to quit. And she said, yeah, okay, I thought you were just going to quit. And she said, of course. And she even offered, hey, would you like to have health insurance while you're gone? You'll have to pay for it, but we can keep you on the health insurance plan. So by having financial leverage, there are so many options you have when you negotiate, whether that's to quit your job, whether that's to remote work, or some other way of working that really works for you and that makes more sense for your life. Now, if you're just starting and you have no money in the bank, my recommendation is to start small. Just try to get $1,000 in the bank. Save as much money as you can to get to that point. And that's just kind of like a baby emergency fund, as Dave Ramsey would call it. And then from there, you build on that. The typical recommendation is to have 3 to 6 months of cash set aside in kind of an emergency fund, or I like the term FU fund. But then you have to just do what's comfortable with you. I have friends who have 12 months of cash set aside because they call it a runway. They say that if I lost my job or if I decided to quit, that gives me 12 months to cover all of my personal expenses without having to worry about it. And that's the key. You have to make sure that you can sleep well at night, and that's what this cash in the bank is all about. My second recommendation, if you never want to step foot in an office again or just have more negotiating leverage with your job, is to reduce your personal expenses as much as possible. Your personal expenses are also known as your personal overhead. Other people call it a burn rate because this is how much money you burn through on a monthly basis. And the amount of money you spend is closely tied to your need to work, to your ability to negotiate a job situation. Because the more money you spend, even if you make $1 million a year, if you spend $1 million, you have to go back to that job the next day. You're tied to it. It's like you're chained to that job. But the lower your expenses are, the less you need that job. Now, I'm not saying you have to skimp and spend no money and have no fun, but particularly concentrate on 3 big expenses. I'm going to call these your big 3. This is your housing, your car, and personal debt. Now, housing is always the first expense that I talk about because according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics in the United States, 25% on average is spent on housing. So eliminating or reducing your housing expense is a really big deal. And going back to my own story, not too long after I began as a real estate entrepreneur, I had very variable income. Sometimes it was good, sometimes it was nothing. And so I sort of accidentally got into something that I've since become one of my favorite real estate strategies, is something called house hacking, where you live in a property that also can produce some income. So there's a lot of different ways to do this. You could just live in a house and rent your extra bedrooms to roommates or on Airbnb. In my case, I lived in a small multi-unit property. I was in a 4-plex I lived in unit number 2. I rented the other 3 units out, and the rent from those 3 units covered 100% of my mortgage payment, my taxes, my insurance. So it's an incredible way to reduce your housing expense, in some cases all the way down to 0. But even if you're not able to live in a multi-unit property, just keeping your housing expense more modest, not buying the biggest house you can get, live in something that's reasonable, that's well within your budget, at the bottom of your budget, to save as much money as possible will give you more leverage because you don't have to spend that money ongoing on a monthly basis. The second of the big 3 expenses to pay attention to is your car. Now for me, having a car that's functional and gets me from point A to point B has always been good enough. I drive older Toyota Avalons or Toyota Camrys, but I know other people are more into cars. I actually interviewed on my podcast one time someone named Sarah King. She's on Instagram as NerdsGuidetoFI. And she gave some tips because she is a car person, but she always recommended buying a car that's 3 or 4 years old so that most of the depreciation from that new car has already gone down. And then also taking care of your car, shopping around really intensely when you're looking for a car. She loved cargurus.com. Look on websites like that and just be patient with your car purchase so that you can buy something for the amount of money that you have saved. Instead of always making a car payment, reducing that overhead, not spending as much money on a car, can reduce your need to negotiate at work. The third of the big 3 expenses is personal debt. If you're making payments on credit cards, on personal debt, on car loans, any of these kind of things, it's now tying you to the need to work a job because you have to make that payment every single month, or the creditor, the person who loaned you the money, is going to come after you for that money. So this is not an easy one to take care of all the time, but sometimes just taking a year or 2 and focusing all of your efforts on saving money, paying yourself first. Like take that first amount of money from your paycheck, set it aside to start paying off your personal debts. There's a few different approaches to doing that. Dave Ramsey talks a lot about something called a debt snowball, where you just line up all of your debts, take the smallest one first, pay that one off first, and then once that's paid off, it frees up the income from that one to pay off the second one, and the third one, and the fourth one until you're out of debt. Most people pay attention to that and really focus on it. It could take a year, maybe 2, to pay off all your debt, and now you have a lot more freedom. You have a lot more leverage to negotiate with your job. There's one more thing that's critical if you really want to have some negotiation leverage and be able to never step foot in an office again, and that's having some income that you control, a side hustle or a personal business that you can make money from. Now, most people, when they think about a business, think about giant corporations like Apple or Amazon. But what I'm talking about here is something much more personal that you could do on the weekend for a few hours, and that you could start very cheaply with just a little bit of money, maybe like $100, not going into a bunch of debt. Now, the power of having your own business is that it gives you multiple streams of income. And this can start off very small, maybe $500 per month or just a few $100s per month in the beginning, and it can often grow into something much bigger that could either supplement you paying off debt or do some other things we talked about, or maybe if it gets successful enough, could even replace your need to go to a job in the first place. Now you might be thinking, what in the world would I do for a business? So I want to recommend a friend of mine. His name is Nick Loper. He has a podcast, really successful podcast called Side Hustle Nation. And I'm going to put a link in the video description below to an article he wrote that has 100 plus ideas for side hustles that can make you $500 per month or more. But I would also recommend just take an inventory, write a list down of things that you're good at. These could be totally unrelated to your current job, but just write down what you're good at and then try to think about which one of those might have some need in the marketplace. And the way I like to start a business is to start super small. Like for example, if you're gonna bake cakes and you're gonna sell cakes to people to make money, don't go back to rent a store to start off. Go to a farmer's market on the weekends, or go to your friends at a club or a church or something. If you find that people are buying it and it's successful on a small scale, then you can slowly start building that up. Having a website, renting some space for a restaurant for 3 hours on the weekend, something like that if you were baking. That's the kind of way you can start a side hustle. And there's so many different ideas. It can be a lot of fun to be an entrepreneur and get your creative juices flowing and give you some security and some leverage to negotiate with your job if you're making more money. Now, if you're wanting to leave your job or renegotiate your work arrangements in the next few months or the next few years, the tips I've given you so far in this video are going to be your best place to start. But I couldn't leave this video without also mentioning the ultimate way to never have to go into an office again, which is to build up enough assets, enough investments, so that you achieve financial independence. That's really what this channel that I have is all about, is building up to this long-term goal that in the next 10 years or maybe 15 years, if you really work hard, if you save your money, if you invest in things like real estate, which has been my investment vehicle of choice, eventually you can have income coming in from your investments to cover all of your expenses, and you really never have to go back and work a job again. Back in 2017, my wife and our 2 kids, we moved to Ecuador and we lived there for 17 months. And the beautiful thing about that is all of the expenses we had there, which were not a lot. We actually lived on about $3,000 per month, but we had more than enough coming in from our rental income back in the United States. About 30 minutes a week is what I spent just talking to my property managers, maybe paying a few bills here and there. I did that all remotely. And then the rest of the week, all of those hours, I was able to walk my kids to school. I was able to write a book, which I did in 2017. I was able to play basketball. I was able to learn Spanish. I was able to do things that mattered to me. Doing what matters is when you can really do that 100% of your time when you have investment income coming in. And I know if you're just starting, that can seem like a far off goal. That's almost like the top of a mountain, like Mount Everest, and you're here at the bottom, and that seems insurmountable. But my recommendation is, and the reason I make this channel, is to give you small tips to ways to make progress, little baby steps to move forward. So just doing what we talked about in this video, saving up an emergency fund, FU money, or starting to reduce your personal expenses, or getting a side hustle, whether that's real estate related or something else, those are the first steps towards achieving financial independence. And if you start doing those now, you'll start climbing up that mountain and eventually find yourself moving up and making a lot of progress. So it's no secret that most Americans are in jobs that they don't love. I recently read an article in a survey at moneypenny.com that shared that 93% of Americans are in jobs that are not their dream jobs, something they're not passionate about. So I hope the tips I've shared with you in this video show that getting your finances in order can be the leverage you need to make a change. Whether you like your job or not right now, within your control within the next months or maybe years, you can make some changes to another job maybe, or renegotiating what you already have in your current job. And if you like this idea of a financial independence lifestyle and you want more examples, I have some videos and a playlist that you can find below in the video description. I also have it here above me somewhere where you can click and listen to interviews and listen to stories of other people who are also aspiring to change careers, to achieve financial independence, and to do more of what matters. See you next time.